June 14th, 1963. The clock on the wall of the penthouse at the Hotel Teresa ticked with a mechanical indifference, marking the passage of seconds that felt like hours. It was 2:14 a.m. Outside, the neon lights of Harlem flickered through a light drizzle, casting long, oily shadows across 125th Street. Inside, the room was silent, save for the faint crackle of a jazz record spinning its final groove. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sat in a high-backed leather chair, his face a mask of carved granite. He wasn't looking at the city he ruled. He was looking at the black rotary telephone on the mahogany desk. When it finally rang, he didn't flinch. He picked it up on the second ring, his movement fluid and precise, like a panther sensing prey. He didn't say hello. He didn't have to. From the other end of the line came a sound that would have broken a lesser man. It was the sound of a torch being lit, followed by the agonizing, wet screams of Marcus Washington. Marcus was a man who didn't belong in the shadows. He was a bookstore owner, a scholar, a man who believed that the pen was mightier than the razor. He was Bumpy's conscience, the only man who could quote Socrates and still find the humanity in a kingpin. And now, he was being liquidated by the Ku Klux Klan. A voice, thick with a jagged southern drawl, came through the receiver, laughing over Marcus's fading cries. The voice told Bumpy that the Empire of the Dark had no place for a king, that Harlem was a jungle they intended to burn to the ground. They told Bumpy that Marcus was just the first matchstick. Bumpy Johnson sat there for exactly 2 minutes, listening to the crackle of burning wood and the final wheezing breaths of his best friend. His knuckles didn't turn white. His eyes didn't tear up. Instead, they turned into 2 chips of black ice, calculating, cold, and utterly devoid of mercy. When the line went dead, Bumpy slowly lowered the receiver. He didn't scream. He didn't break the furniture. He reached into his silk vest, pulled out a silver case, and lit a cigarette. He watched the tiny orange ember glow in the darkness, a miniature sun in a room full of shadows. He whispered to the empty room, a promise that carried the weight of a death sentence. You want to play with fire? I'll give you an inferno that God himself can't put out. By 3 a.m., the upper echelon of the Harlem underworld was gathered in the basement of a nondescript brownstone. These were men who lived by the blade and the bullet, men like Quick Jackson, a man whose hands moved faster than the eye could track, and dozens of others who feared nothing but the man sitting at the head of the table. The air was thick with the smell of expensive tobacco and cheap fear. Bumpy looked at them, his presence filling the room like a heavy fog. He didn't raise his voice, but every word hit like a hammer on an anvil. He told them to put their guns away. He told them that tonight the rules of engagement had shifted. This wasn't a gang war. This was a cleansing. He looked at Quick Jackson and uttered the command that would change the history of the streets. No bullets tonight. Go to the garages. Go to the warehouses. Bring me every gallon of gasoline and every ounce of kerosene you can find. From this moment on, Harlem speaks in the language of the flame. The first night was the night of the warning. At 11:47 p.m. on the corner of 135th and Lenox, a high-ranking KKK informant, a man who thought his police badge made him untouchable, was dragged from his car. He wasn't shot. He was doused in high-octane fuel and left standing in the middle of the intersection. When Bumpy stepped out of the shadows, he didn't look like a gangster. He looked like an officiating priest at a dark sacrament. He didn't ask questions. He knew the answers. He simply took his cigarette, flicked it onto the man's soaked lapel, and watched. The man didn't just burn. He became a pillar of fire that illuminated the entire block. Bumpy stood there, the heat reflecting in his calm eyes until the screaming stopped. By dawn, the ashes of the informant were scattered across the steps of the local precinct, a silent testament that the law of the street had superseded the law of the land. The second and third nights were a blur of systematic devastation. Bumpy wasn't just killing, he was conducting a symphony of retribution. Each night, a different cell of the Klan's local operation was dismantled with surgical, fiery precision. In the dead of night, the safe houses where they plotted their hate were transformed into crematoriums. They would wake up to the smell of gasoline pouring under their doors, only to see Bumpy's men standing outside, torches held high like grim statues. The message was clear. There was no corner of the city where the Dragon of Harlem couldn't reach. The fear that the Klan had tried to sow in Marcus's bookstore was now harvested in their own hideouts. The hunters had become the hunted, and the prey was being roasted alive. By the fourth night, the city was vibrating with a tension that felt like it might snap the Brooklyn Bridge. The police were paralyzed. How do you arrest a man for arson when the witnesses are nothing but scorched earth and the public sees him as a god? Bumpy walked the streets of Harlem during the day, his suit perfectly pressed, nodding to the grandmothers on their stoops, handing out $5 bills to children who didn't know their hero was currently turning the outskirts of the city into a graveyard. He was the thallium mayor, a man of absolute poise who spent his afternoons playing chess in the park and his nights burning the enemies of his people. He moved with a terrifying tranquility, a strategist who had already seen the checkmate while his opponents were still trying to understand the opening move. But the fifth night brought the rain, and with it, the scent of betrayal. The Klan, desperate and backed into a corner, had reached out to the one thing Bumpy couldn't completely control: the corrupt upper brass of the NYPD. They set a trap at a warehouse near the East River, promising a meeting to discuss terms. Bumpy knew it was an ambush. He knew the air smelled of more than just salt water and rotting fish. But he went anyway, because a king doesn't hide. He was accompanied by Quick Jackson, the man who had been his shadow since the early days of the numbers games. When the floodlights kicked on, revealing a phalanx of Klansmen and rogue officers, Bumpy didn't reach for a weapon. He stood his ground, a silhouette of defiance against the blinding white light. The ambush was supposed to be the end of the legend, a final execution. But Quick Jackson had lived his life by a code that modern men can't comprehend. As the first volley of gunfire erupted, Quick didn't duck. He moved. He had wired himself with the very explosives they had used to level the Klan's safe houses. He looked at Bumpy, a silent goodbye passing between them in a fraction of a second, and charged into the center of the enemy line. The explosion was a sunburst that shook the foundations of the city. Quick Jackson became a human bomb, a sacrifice of blood and fire that cleared a path for his mentor. In the chaos of the blast, Bumpy didn't run. He walked through the smoke, his face smeared with the soot of his brother's sacrifice, picking up a discarded shotgun and finishing the work that the explosion had started. That night, the East River didn't run with water. It ran with the dark, oily remains of those who thought they could trap a lion in a cage of fire. Bumpy stood on the pier as the sirens wailed in the distance, his heart a hollow chamber of grief, but his resolve as hard as the steel of the guns he carried. He had lost his conscience in Marcus and his shadow in Quick. All that was left was the king. The sixth night was the end of days. Bumpy didn't wait for the enemy to come to him. He drove alone to a fortified farmhouse in Westchester, the secret sanctum of the Grand Wizard, the man who had held the phone while Marcus burned. The farmhouse was guarded by men with rifles and dogs, but they weren't prepared for what was coming. Bumpy didn't sneak in. He drove a gasoline tanker truck through the front gates, the heavy vehicle roaring like a beast from the pits of hell. He jumped from the cab seconds before it slammed into the porch, detonating in a fireball that turned the midnight sky into a searing midday orange. Amidst the ruins of the burning estate, Bumpy found the Grand Wizard crawling through the dirt, his ornate robes scorched, his dignity dissolved into pathetic whimpers. Bumpy stood over him, the fire behind him framing him like a dark halo. He didn't use a gun. He didn't use a knife. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Marcus Washington's silver Zippo, the one Marcus used to light his pipe while they discussed the works of W.E.B. Du Bois. Bumpy looked at the trembling man and spoke with a voice that sounded like grinding stones. Marcus believed in the light of reason. He believed that even men like you could be taught. But I believe in the light of the truth. And the truth is, you're nothing but kindling. Bumpy nosed the Zippo open with a metallic click that echoed louder than the roar of the fire. He didn't flick it. He dropped the entire lighter into the pool of gasoline spreading at the Grand Wizard's feet. I'm not killing you for what you did to Marcus, Bumpy said, his eyes reflecting the growing flames. I'm killing you because you dared to think you could bring your darkness into my house. Sleep well in the heat, you son of a bitch. As Bumpy walked back to his car, he didn't look back. The farmhouse collapsed into a heap of white-hot timber, taking the last of the KKK's northern leadership with it. The 6 nights of fire were over. When the sun rose on the 7th day, Harlem was different. The air was clearer, though the scent of smoke lingered in the brickwork of the tenements. The KKK had vanished, their names erased from the ledgers of the living, their influence burned away until not even a memory remained. Bumpy Johnson returned to his seat at the Hotel Teresa. He was older, his hair a bit grayer, his heart a bit heavier. But his grip on the crown was absolute. He had proven that he wasn't just a gangster. He was the immune system of a community that the world had tried to infect. He was the wall between the people of Harlem and the wolves at the door. He spent the rest of his days as a legend, a ghost that walked the streets in a silk suit. People told stories of the 6 nights of the inferno, whispering them to their children as cautionary tales of what happens when you try to bring hate to the doorstep of a man who owns the fire. Bumpy didn't confirm the stories, but he didn't deny them either. He just sat in his chair playing his chess games, looking out over the streets he had saved, knowing that the peace of Harlem was written in the ashes of his enemies. He was the Godfather, the Mayor, and the Dragon, all wrapped into one. He was the man who had looked into the abyss, and when the abyss blinked, he set it on fire. Now I want you to think about that. I want you to look at the streets you walk on and ask yourself, who is standing at the gates? Who is the man who would burn the world down just to keep your doorstep clean? Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a man. He was a force of nature, a reminder that loyalty isn't just a word, it's a blood oath signed in fire. If you've ever felt like the world was closing in, remember the name Bumpy Johnson. Remember the 6 nights where one man showed the devil that Harlem was already occupied. What would you do for your brothers? How far into the fire would you walk? Drop a comment below if you believe that every neighborhood needs a king like Bumpy, or tell me which part of this legend sent a chill down your spine. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more chronicles of the men who ruled the shadows. Until next time, keep your eyes on the street and your heart on the code. Would you like me to dive deeper into the secret war Bumpy waged against the 5 families of New York next?